Our latest CBS News poll found the majority of Americans are prioritizing their health over the economic toll of coronavirus. 63% of people in the U.S. say they're worried stay-at-home restrictions could be lifted too fast and worsen the outbreak. Meanwhile, 37% feel the opposite. They say they're more concerned lockdowns are lifting too slowly and hurting the economy. For more, let's bring in CBS News Elections and Surveys Director Anthony Salvanto. Anthony, it has been a long time. So good to see you. What does the data suggest about what Americans would actually do if stay-at-home orders were lifted right now?
Hey, Elaine, good to talk to you. And that is exactly the right question because, of course, everybody's wrestling with these decisions about when to open things up. But it really depends on whether or not people would go out. Would they go out to more stores, go out to public events and public places? So we asked them, and we did find a lot of hesitancy in that regard. We found almost half of people said they would not immediately start going out unless they felt like the outbreak was starting to really subside. A lot more said they would maybe go out depending on what they saw the outbreak doing, and a lot of them still would say no, they wouldn't go out until they really felt confident that it had completely abated. And then we asked in particular, would you go to a bar or a restaurant? And 29% said yes. Would you get on a plane? And 15% said yes. So those are small numbers, and it speaks again to the idea that until people are really confident that they won't get sick by going out, you may have this reticence to really go out there and start to jumpstart the economy.
Right. Well, more than 26 million people in the U.S. have lost their jobs since the coronavirus outbreak. Millions of Americans are taking a huge financial hit. How long, Anthony, do people think that they can actually hold out for?
Yeah, what was interesting, Elaine, is that a third of people said they had already been impacted. And we have seen very large levels of concern even beyond that. But there was another 4 in 10 who felt like they could hold on another few weeks before the economic impact of this would start to hit them, and a few more who didn't feel like they'd ever be affected. What was really interesting was that even among people who said that they were concerned about a job loss or who had already been impacted, they still mostly worried that restrictions would be lifted too fast and that the outbreak would worsen. So there again, you see people wrestling with this difficult decision, but coming down on the side of the outbreak has got to get under control, and they have to find some metric to show that it is before they are really confident getting back out there, Elaine.
So we have seen the president sparring with some governors on a number of issues, including reopening their states. What are people saying about reopening, and who should actually be making that call?
So throughout our polling, since this outbreak really began here, people have said that they felt like their governors were doing a pretty good job or a good job handling things in their state, but the president has found much more division. He's slightly negative on his handling of the outbreak. And so perhaps not surprisingly, we see this kind of lopsided number of people saying that they feel like their governor or their local officials should be making the decision about when to open things up. Less so, much less so, do they say that that should be the president's decision. Now, in context, that's really not unusual about a lot of things. People often feel like local and closer to home officials should be on top of things and making these kinds of decisions. But clearly, it is the case here that people are looking at their governors.
Interesting. Well, Anthony, we have been seeing these protests across the country over stay-at-home orders, and you found that there's very little support regarding these protests. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Right. A majority of Americans said that they oppose those protesters. Very little support for them. And a couple of things, Elaine. One is that dovetails with the larger theme that we've been talking about, which is that people still show this concern that restrictions might be lifted too quickly. But it also demonstrates what happens with all sorts of protests, which is often that you do have people who feel passionate about an issue, may be very vocal, but are they reflective of the wider population? And in this case, we're seeing that that answer is no. In this case, we're seeing that there's a large number who say that they're not supportive. And one step further, people also say that they don't feel like the president should be encouraging those protests. We asked that in light of a few tweets that went out, of course, last week. And even among Republicans who strongly support the president, think he's doing a great job on this. But even among them, they're not necessarily sure that the president should be encouraging those protests either, Elaine.
Interesting. Well, Anthony, you also found more people think the country is becoming divided over the medical and service workers on the front lines. How do Americans feel about them?
So overall, we said, do you feel like the country is becoming more united as it fights against this outbreak, or more divided? And more people thought the country was becoming more divided. But having said that, there's something that really transcends all kinds of politics and all kinds of divisions, and that is the overwhelming support and the feeling, as Americans express pride in what they are seeing medical professionals, doctors, nurses doing in working to fight this outbreak. Also, food service and service workers and delivery workers, all of them, Americans told us, made them feel proud about what their fellow Americans are doing. And also, I should add, people also said they felt proud about Americans practicing social distancing, everybody who they feel is doing their part to help to contain this. So again, you and I have spent many an hour talking about partisan divisions and divisions which clearly are still out there and part of this, but at least on that front, in that real widespread finding of pride in what Americans are seeing in their fellow citizens, that part is cutting across all kinds of lines, Elaine.
Right. Yeah, certainly nice to see that there are still some things that Americans can agree on in the midst of all of this. All right, CBS News Elections and Surveys Director Anthony Salvanto. Anthony, thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you.